All right. Welcome to PG Sports Now. I'm Paul Zeise. It is your daily dose of me, I guess is what we're going to call this. Before we get started, the game is always on at Archie's on Carson Street, Pittsburgh's best place for food, for drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 10 a.m. I'm sorry, Sundays for the game. It's from noon to 2 a.m. Be sure to check their daily drink specials and stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you when you get there. And of course, you can always try my grilled cheese sandwich. It's named after me, the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. At any rate, we are here on a Wednesday. And of course, the Steelers don't play this week, so there was no Mike Tomlin news conference to dissect. But there was some news yesterday that probably is at least on your radar if you're a Steelers fan, and that is that Deontay Johnson is now a member of the Ravens. The Ravens basically were able to acquire him for almost nothing. And, of course, he'll be a free agent at the end of this year. So there's really not a whole lot of risk for them. I think that when you look at that move alone and you look at what the Ravens have done this year, clearly it makes them a little bit better. It clearly makes their offense a little bit better. It gives them an opportunity to have a better passing game. It gives Lamar Jackson another weapon. But I'll be honest with you, as strange as it sounds, the problems that the Ravens have had seem to be or seemingly all on the defensive side of the ball. They can't hold leads. They can't stop teams from scoring when they need to. And that's been a big part of the problem. Classic example was the other day against the Browns. You know, Jameis Winston goes right down the field, throws a touchdown pass. So the Ravens obviously are a very good team. They have a dynamic quarterback who is really, really good. He's a playmaker. He's one of the best players in the NFL. But the problem that they have is they just aren't healthy, for one thing, on defense. But two, I think their defense has got some holes. And I think that one of the things that we're going to see in a couple of weeks, the Steelers are built probably to exploit those holes, and that is because they now have a passing game. So to me, I don't know that Deontay Johnson really changes a whole lot. I just don't. I think at the end of the day, we look at it and we basically say that you have the ability, if you're the Ravens, to score maybe a couple more points, but scoring really hasn't been their issue in so many ways. They're able to score. It's can you stop other teams from scoring, especially late. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I think the Ravens are maybe the dumbest team in the NFL in so many ways because of some of the things they do. They're just foolish, starting with the fact that they go for it all the time, starting instead of kicking field goals and taking points, starting with the fact that they seem to fumble or turn the ball over at the worst times possible, and starting with the fact that sometimes it feels to me like they allow the analytics of things to basically cloud their judgment. So I like where the Steelers are positioned in the AFC North. I think that basically if you look at Deontay Johnson coming to the Ravens, I don't know that it makes them measurably better. I think they'll be better, but I don't think it makes them measurably better. And I think that really if you break it down the way you need to break it down, they need to go out and get some help for their secondary, and they probably need to go get some help, even maybe another linebacker, because their big problem right now, their defense is good at times, but it's basically propped up by about three big name players. And because of that, they've got some holes. Now, we talk about the Steelers and some of the holes the Steelers have. We've talked a lot about, obviously, at receiver, they've got a big hole. I'm not going to get all that excited about I'm not going to get all that excited about the idea that they, Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin had a good night the other night because they played the Giants. Was it encouraging? Yes, it was very encouraging. Absolutely. But I think there are still some ways to go. And I think that they can get better at that position. There's one or two players, I think, out there that are still out there on the market that might make them a little bit better. I know people have talked about, what's his name, Cortland Sutton from the Broncos. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that was when we were really in a place where we thought the Broncos were going to be sellers. But right now, I just don't know that there's any reason for them to be sellers. And so, the number of guys that are available and are out there are probably less than you think. But they need to basically figure out. Honestly, what they're going to do at receiver. They got about a week or whatever it is before the trade deadline. Once they do that and they get through it, if they don't add somebody, it could be one of those things where I really, really wonder if they're going to be quite good enough. So it is important to understand that is got to be a priority. But the other priority that they need to have is a defensive line, I think. Cam Heyward is not a spring chicken. If you looked at him the other day, if you watched them the other day, and I'm talking about the Steelers, they got beat up a little bit up front. I think you go with the same theory you have at linebacker. The thing that makes you excited about the linebackers is that there's 3 outside linebackers and 3 inside linebackers, and there doesn't appear to be any drop-off no matter who's in the game. Even when T.J. Watt is out of the game a little bit, obviously T.J. Watt is T.J. Watt. But with Herbig and Highsmith out there, or with Watt and Herbig or whatever, you can steal a few plays. And, Herbig has proved he can make some plays, and he can be a guy that is a high-impact pass rusher. So to me, I think if you look at it that way, that is exactly sort of the formula that they have at outside linebacker. Inside linebacker, you've got Peyton Wilson, you've got Patrick Queen, you've got Landon Roberts, you've got 3 guys who all can get the job done. That means in the fourth quarter, when you're trying to put these games away, you've got fresh legs. You can play Watt and Highsmith, basically for the last 3 or 4 series because they have fresh legs, because you've given them rest without really sacrificing a ton earlier in the game. Same thing it applies to the inside linebacker spot. You can figure out who your 2 best inside linebackers are and play them the last 3 or 4 series or whatever, last 3 series of the game. And I think maybe they don't have a lot of depth on the defensive line, and that could become a problem. I think Cam Heyward has played reasonably well, and he hasn't really shown that he is, his age or that he's slowing down. But the reality is 17, 18 weeks or whatever it is a long season, especially when you're that age. So I look at it from the standpoint of, you go get some depth for him. You go get some help for him. You go get somebody who you can use for him so you can maybe steal 8 or 9 plays early and go from there. So I just feel like I feel like that's something that they really need to think about doing, just because I like the model, that the way that it works for the linebackers. Like I said, if you have DJ Watt, if you have TJ Watt, someone actually just looked down here, someone was talking about DJ, which is obviously Deontay Johnson. But if you have TJ Watt fresh in the fourth quarter, you saw the other day what happens. He basically called ball game with his strip sack. And it's funny if you watch. One of the things, these are the little nuances like you see nowadays because of how the NFL is covered and how everybody has a podcast and everybody has a breakdown of film and everything. But if you watch the Manning cast, which is the Mannings who were watching Monday Night Football, if you watch it on, I think it's on ESPN too. The Mannings usually have a guest. I think they had Bill Cowher the other night. They've had, Bill Belichick in the past. They have people join them and they watch the game and they comment on it. One of the things that was interesting about the play of the strip sack, if you watch it, Eli Manning was saying very specifically, he was saying that Daniel Jones needed to signal the tight end to come in motion to basically be a second blocker on the side of TJ Watt. And he basically said, this is a mistake. He's got to get that tight end over there. And, of course, he didn't get over there. TJ Watt blew past whoever the tackle was and made it easy, quick work. So I think that those kinds of things, there is an oversaturation of what I call online scouts and online film watchers and all that other stuff. But there is some stuff that is valuable. And obviously, Eli Manning and Peyton Manning talking about football is obviously very valuable. But nowadays we have the ability to see how things develop and how things unwind. So now, you see a guy like T.J. Watt, if he's healthy at the end of the year, but also if he's fresh at the end of the year, it makes the Steelers a completely different team. I mean, there's maybe 3 guys on every roster. Some rosters, 2 guys that really are the difference. Most of them obviously is the quarterback, but there's 1 or 2 guys beyond the quarterback that usually make a huge difference and make a team go from maybe a 9-win team to a 10, 11, 12-win team. And I think TJ Watt is that guy, obviously. I'm not breaking any new ground here, but if you can keep him healthy and fresh for the entire year, because that's been part of the problem that the Steelers have had. They haven't been healthy and fresh at the end of the year. And so I think that's something that you look at and you basically say, well, you know what? They got, they have an extra outside linebacker that gives them the ability to have fresh guys at that position in the fourth quarter. And they also need maybe to do that with the defensive line. Now, somebody asks, Robbie here asked me, yes, obviously a receiver is the priority in terms of a trade, but we're talking about what are the trade possibilities for the Steelers. Receiver is a priority, but if there's another place that you would look at and say, well, you know what, maybe they need to add, I would say depth at the defensive line, because to me, the defensive line is not deep enough. And I fear that as you go through the season and it gets longer, especially since the bye week is now. I mean, after this bye week or whatever you want to call it, open week, and then you got 9 games in a row and playoffs, you've got some older guys. I mean, TJ Watt's not a spring chicken either. You want to make sure that when you get to the finish line and you get to, the playoffs, you've got your full arsenal of defensive players available to you, and they're healthy, and they don't have any little nagging injuries. And again, when you're 35, it's one thing. When you're 25, it's one thing versus when you're 35. When you're 35, a little nagging injury can be a huge problem. So I just think that it is one of those situations where you look at what the Steelers are doing and how they're doing it, and I think they're really close. Really close. And there's just a couple of things that they need to do. If they add a little depth for the defensive line and they add a receiver, I think honestly they're in pretty good shape for what goes on the rest of the season. So we just have to see how that all unfolds. I think what's interesting now is how they're going to be able to preserve the legs of these guys to make sure that they're healthy. Because, I mean, honestly, let's face it, a couple of different times they got to the finish line and they weren't healthy. And they had some guys that were hurt, and Watt's been hurt. And, the 1 year that Le'Veon Bell was hurt, and they've had some injuries like that. Part of the thing that could help is the fact that they are ahead of the Ravens right now. They have the Ravens twice, and they've had the Ravens numbers. What did they won? 6 out of the last 7 out of the last 8, whatever it's been. They have the opportunity to win the AFC North. That's a part of the equation, too, because if you win the AFC North, you get that extra week off. Actually, I'm lying. Now that I think about it, the way I'm thinking of the old format. Now, you're right. It doesn't really matter because guess what? If you win the AFC North and you don't win the number 1 seed, you still have to play that first week. You don't necessarily get that much of a break. But either way, it'd be nice to get a home game as opposed to a road game, which is, I think a big difference for the Steelers. And so that's not to say they couldn't go on the road and win. But to me, games like the other night when you're playing bad teams and you beat them, it's so important. Not necessarily because you proved you can beat a bad team, but it's so important for you down the road to basically have that extra win and have that ability to go through and do some things in the playoffs where you're at home. So that's that. I mean, I just feel like, Deontay Johnson going to the Ravens, I don't know that it really does a whole lot other than gives Lamar Jackson one more weapon to have. Is he a difference maker? We've seen seen him, for 4 years or whatever it was. I don't know that I would classify him as a difference maker. I really don't. I think that at the end of the day, he's probably a guy who's just sort of a above average receiver. But anytime you give that kind of player, and I'm talking about Lamar Jackson, another weapon like that, I think it's really, really, really going to be important for him just to have another weapon. I still don't think it changes what their problem is. I think their problem is very simple. Their defense. I think and then they have some injuries, but I also think that's a problem. Teresa asks about another tackle. Boy, you've spent a lot of equity on tackles, haven't you? Draft equity on tackles. And obviously Broderick Jones. I really believe that with Troy Fontenot coming back next year, Broderick Jones, you've picked 2 first-round tackles in the last few years here. I don't know how you would justify that, other than to say basically you're basically saying that Broderick Jones is a bust, and I don't believe that he's a bust. I think that he's out of position. But the problem is Dan Moore, that none of these guys have been able to beat out Dan Moore. And if you can't beat out Dan Moore, you can't take the left tackle spot away from him. And frankly, the way that the team has played, you're not going to really change things like that, especially since you don't have Troy Fontenot at your disposal right now because he's hurt. So I don't think they're going to do that, because basically you're saying, if you went out and traded for a tackle right now, you'd basically be saying that we wasted a first-round pick on Broderick Jones, and I just don't know that they're going to say that. That's really what it's going to be. That's really what it's going to be with them. I think that, honestly, if they're going to make a move, it'll be for a receiver and maybe some depth on the defensive line. I just don't see many other areas where they're going to be able to make themselves better. Honestly, I just don't see any other areas where it makes a whole lot of sense for them to make a trade or make a move, just because they are, like every other Steeler, like every other team in the NFL, put it that way. I think it's really kind of one of those things that every team is going to have a little bit of area where there's a flaw, or they're not quite as good as they need to be. And that's really what it is. You have to live with some of the flaws that you have. I think if you look at the Steelers realistically, I still am not convinced that Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin are good enough. Maybe with Russell Wilson playing now, maybe I'll be proven wrong. I think the offensive line's biggest problem is continuity. They got to get Zach Frazier back. They got to get Broderick Jones has got to play better. I think, they have Ciamalo back. I think if you can get your 5 guys that you want to play week after week after week after week, you get better. So that's what it comes down to for me. You get better if you are in a situation where you're able to have your offensive line play and there's some kind of continuity with it. I think that's the key to me. Always is just continuity on the offensive line. And then, I think defensively, they've got to figure out how to stop the run and be consistent at it. And, that might require, as we've talked about, going out and maybe getting it done to another defensive lineman of some sort. Larry Ogunjobi is an interesting player for me. I watch him some plays and I say, yeah, he's that guy. I watch him other plays and I say he was that guy, but now he's getting to the point where he's old. I just think that's where we're at. That's exactly where we're at with this team, is that there's a couple of little flaws. I need to see a lot more from Russell Wilson, first of all, because I think that he showed the other night he can elevate some of these guys that we've been talking about who maybe haven't looked as good because the quarterback isn't very good. Like we always say, and Patrick Mahomes is the best in the game. I get it. But I think when you look at Patrick Mahomes and the guys that he's had around him, and even Tom Brady for a lot of years when he was in New England, and if you look at the one year when Peyton Manning went to the Super Bowl and they lost to the Saints, the guys they had at receiver were not exactly world beaters, but with great quarterbacks throwing to them, they become a lot better. And so I feel like that's really the issue here when it comes to the Steelers. Maybe Russell Wilson makes these guys look a whole lot better than they are. And if that's the case, then maybe they don't need to go out and get themselves a receiver to go along with George Pickens. So that's really, my thoughts. You have a week now to sort of get ready. You have a week to really kind of figure out what you are going to do on your offensive line. You have 6 days, I think, 7 days, whatever it is, to figure out if you need to go add somebody. That's the key, because the trade deadline is coming up next week. We've seen some teams that have made some trades. None of them I would really call shocking or, changing the world. I know that some teams have gone out and gotten some receivers that have big names, but they're old. So we'll see. I think in the NFL is different than baseball. Baseball's trade deadline is always really interesting, and there's a lot of guys that move from one team to another, and there's big name players that move. It's not quite that exciting in football, but it could be. If the Steelers make a move, that makes it obviously exciting, gives us something to talk about. So that's really what it comes down to when we talk about the Steelers. And of course, I think a big thing for them is they've got to just continue to build offense and get better and figure out exactly what they're going to be with Russell Wilson. That's what I would tell you. Before we go any further, the game is always on at Archie's on Carson, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. Be sure to check their daily drink specials. Stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you. Now, last night, we're switching gears because this is something that needs to be discussed. Last night, the Penguins, again, just look like a team that needs a new coach. There's no other way to say that. Now, we've had a lot of people ask, and there's a lot of people wonder, what exactly are we going to do? Listen, I don't think there's any momentum within the front office or people that are the decision makers. I don't think there's any momentum for any of them to fire Mike Sullivan. But we have a lot of discussions in the town about Mike Tomlin. These two guys are very, very similar. The difference is Mike Sullivan has won two championships, and they were a lot more recent than the championship that Mike Tomlin won. The difference also, however, is in hockey, when you've got three. You look at their power play. What do they have? 4 Hall of Famers on their power play, basically. Malkin, Crosby, Carlson probably is going to be a Hall of Famer. Maybe Letang. We're talking about a power play unit that's got 4 Hall of Famers on it. When you've got guys like that at the top of your roster, one of the things that really is very clear is I think Mike Sullivan's a good coach when he's got guys that can play the way he wants to play. But guess what? He ain't got those guys right now. And if they're going to win as they're currently constituted, honestly, and they need to go find somebody who's going to be willing to be a far more structured, far more disciplined, far more defense out to offense minded coach that's going to basically really try and highlight their strengths and cover their weaknesses. Now, one of their biggest weaknesses, there's not much you can do about it. One of their biggest weaknesses is their goalie's not very good. And I don't know what you can do about that. Especially since somebody made the decision to sign him for a lot of years and a lot of money. It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. So now you've got a bad goalie. It's hard to overcome that, but it's especially hard to overcome that when you give up odd man break after odd man break, because you continue to try and play a style of hockey that worked in 2016 and 2017 when you were the fastest team in the league. You're not the fastest team in the league or anywhere close to that anymore. And your stars are now old. And so because of that, I don't know, maybe try and play a different way, but Mike Sullivan's not going to. And he gets indignant when you ask him about it. And he basically says, we've got the players to play the way we want to play, period. That's just the way I would say. I mean, I think it's just going to be important to note that they're not probably going to fire him. Boston Sports, as a Fenway Sports Group, they love him. I think Cal Dubas thinks he's a good coach. I mean, I look at it and I just say, I don't think it's a situation of where he's going away. I think it's very similar to Mike Tomlin. If you look at the Mike Tomlin discussion, it's very, very similar. A lot of people want him to go away. A lot of people think that he should have been fired a couple of years ago when they lost, when they didn't make the playoffs, or when they went to the fifth year in a row without winning a playoff game. Well, now it's 7. There's a lot of people that think that he should be fired, but realistically, I don't think that that's ever going to happen. So I'm not sure why we talk about it constantly. It makes no sense to me. It feels to me like one of those conversations that's a waste of energy. And quite frankly, I think I'm to the point now where I think the discussion about Mike Sullivan getting fired might be a waste of our discussion as well. Because if you have seen this team for the last 2 or 3 years and you don't think a change is needed, I don't know what the hell, then there's some people that really believe, this 5 or 6 game losing streak or whatever they're on right now. Oh, well, this is going to be the streak that shows you. But it's just not the case. I just don't think there's any energy at all to fire him. Clearly there's and here's the other part of it. I don't want to hear that it was Cal Dubas that signed Tristan Jarry, because Jarry was always Sullivan's guy. And that's something, and it's something like, again, in the last 2 years, it's the same. It's so similar with the Steelers. Mike Tomlin's guy was Kenny Pickett, so he doesn't get to blame. I can't even think of, not Omar Khan, Kevin Colbert. He doesn't get to blame Kevin Colbert for it, because Kenny Pickett was always Mike Tomlin's guy. So if he didn't have a good enough quarterback, it's on him. And it's the same thing with Sullivan. Jarry has always been Sullivan's guy. That's the reality of it. Just like Matt Murray, not Fleury, speaking of, bringing it all around to last night, Matt Murray was always going to be Sullivan's guy, and, rightfully so. I mean, hindsight being hindsight, you say the Penguins should have just kept signing Fleury and kept him around, and they'd have had more success over the last few years. Right. But in reality, Murray was 8 years younger than him. Obviously, had just won 2 Stanley Cups. There's not a single person on the planet probably that would have traded Murray instead of Fleury, even though they would have got a king's ransom for Murray way back, right, coming off those Cups. So to me, last night, obviously, Fleury was celebrated in Pittsburgh, as he should be. I mean, he's a guy that basically, is one of the most popular players we've had in this town for a long, long time. And I think that that's the key to me, is that when you celebrate a guy like that, it better be somebody like him. Now, the one thing is, he's been gone so long. The fact that he's still one of the most popular Penguins speaks volumes to his time here. But I thought the celebration was great. I thought that, the way that they made him the number 1 star was great. And heck, the Penguins even accommodated him by losing the game, right? At any rate, I think that's one of those things where we stop asking about Mike Sullivan being fired, stop asking about Mike Tomlin being fired, because they're not going to happen. Mike Tomlin could lose every single game for the rest of the year, and he's still not getting fired. I'll be the first to say I'm wrong. Honestly, I'll be the first to say that I'm wrong if they fire Mike Sullivan, but I just don't see it happening. Not this year, not next year. Maybe he leaves for another team, but I just feel like that's where we're at in terms of Mike Sullivan, and I think he needs to be fired, because I don't think he's the right coach anymore, and I think that he needs to be a guy that gets another job somewhere, sort of like Dan Bylsma did. But good coaches can run their course in a certain place, and I think he has. I really do. I feel like it's important to note that. So we'll see what happens with the Penguins, see if they can turn this thing around, but I just don't feel like they can or they will. We are going to do this every day. We're going to try and just do as much as we can do, talk about all of the different issues of the area of the day. I think one of the things that we'll do is I'll be more reactionary. We're just sort of experimenting with all this, but I'll be more reactionary. If there's big news that breaks, I'll probably put a video up and let you react to it. Hopefully we can react to your comments. We get a lot of viewers' comments, and that's a good thing. We're just kind of trying to figure out all of this and how we're going to do it, but I think it's going to work. We just got to get it going. So if you got any suggestions, email me. Obviously, I'll have a mailbag up later today. Every week I do a mailbag for the Post-Gazette. We'll do what we do. So at any rate, enjoy the rest of your day. We will basically see you tomorrow at the same time. It'll be Adam and I, and we will go from there. There we go. I think this is it. Yeah, I think this is where we go right here. And then we go right here to this.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.